we'll start with a brief introduction from both of the two advisors, which is Steven Langford and Joseph Munt. You've probably already read about them in our posts, and then we'll open the stage for you guys. We've already received a few great questions, so we'll go through a few of them, and we encourage all of you to ask questions live here in the webinar. Okay, our first presenter, or first advisor, is Steve Langford from SynCardia. And Steve, maybe just tell us a little bit about you, your journey, and how you got where you are right now, so the students get a little bit of your background, please.
Oh, that's a challenge. I have always, from the time I was a young boy, I loved to take things apart and put them together to see if I could make it still work. And that was a challenge and fun, and I loved it. I grew up building things. When I was in my teens, I had a few neighbors who had some health challenges, and I was always fascinated with what they had to go through and the machines that they were attached to. One in particular was on dialysis, and he was on a very, very large machine, and it was unbelievable what they had to do. And I compare that with what I know my friends who have diabetes now, and now they just have a little pump that they snap onto them, and it's just incredible. But I became enthralled with medicine, and I love to be able to build things. And I loved electronics. And so when I went to school, to university, I was preparing to do engineering, but I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something with engineering that was related to healthcare and the healthcare industry. And so I took pre-med to fill up many of my requirements, as well as my engineering courses. And then I designed my own biomedical engineering major, because back then biomedical engineering was just starting. And so I got to make up my own degree. My degree is in electrical engineering, but it's a smattering of many, many things. Strength of materials, chemical engineering, of course, a lot of mathematics and physics. So that's a little bit about my background. And when I graduated from university, I had some friends that were in biomedical research, and I was able to go to some of the research laboratories and see some of the animal surgeries, but that was more because I just loved to go in and I loved to see that. And then I had to go to work because I was married and I had kids, and I had to go to work. So I went to work for a computer manufacturing company, and I worked for 3 years in engineering, some design work, basically PCs. And then one day I got a phone call from someone that I had interfaced with for many years that knew of my interest in the biomedical world. And he said, Rob Jarvik, who's making the Jarvik 7 artificial heart, needs an engineer. I thought of you. And so I went, and that was a Thursday or Friday, and I went to work for Rob Jarvik with the Jarvik 7 artificial heart on Monday. And I've been working with the artificial heart since.
Wow, that's a great story. That's very interesting. And Jarvik is now SynCardia, is that correct?
Yes, the Jarvik artificial heart was changed and modified through the years. The original Jarvik artificial heart was in the 80s, and then in the 90s we formed a new company called Cardio West, and the Cardio West heart leveraged a lot of the research that had been done, and we started a new clinical trial in 1991-92, and then we had an 11-year clinical trial, and in 2004 we acquired FDA approval and subsequent CE marks. And so we've been doing, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's been a great adventure. Now it's SynCardia, and we have two sizes of artificial hearts now. One for adolescent or teenager type body frames, and then the larger 70cc heart, which meets most of the adult population needs. And also, I think you all are aware that the artificial heart is a bridge to transplant. So we put it in for critically ill patients to keep them healthy and strong so that they are a good transplant candidate. And currently, we are working on the next generation, which will be totally implantable. And right now, I can't say a lot about that, but it is ongoing research that's very, very exciting. And we've got two different models that we're working on that both look fairly promising, as well as improving what we have now.
Cool. So a lot happening in space, and you surely know about it. All right, then I'll hand over to our next presenter, Joseph Mudd. So again, I'm not going to read this out. You've probably read it on our post, but I'll just hand over to Joe. Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks. So yeah, I'm Joe Mudd. I'm a principal project manager at Bridge to Life. Previously, I was at SynCardia with Steve over there, helped them do some R&D work. I started my career as a mechanical engineer. I got my degree at Northern Arizona University. And then I really didn't know what I wanted to do with that degree. So I was just kind of looking for the most interesting design job. And with that, I found a small company called General Plasma, and they made vacuum coating machines. So when you see, the mirrors or your cell phone screens or anything like that, it's a piece of plastic or glass that's coated. And we made the machines that made that coating. It was a very small company, less than 20 people. It was very fast-paced. It was a very demanding job. I worked often over 80 hours a week for about 2 years for the time I was there. So very, very stressful, but I learned a heck of a lot in the design space. So everything around mechanical engineering, from tolerancing to system design to integration with electronics and everything like that. But I got pretty burnt out with the long hours and the stressful job, so I moved on and I went to a company that made lasers. And the company that made lasers made all kinds of different lasers, from, again, industrial lasers to defense lasers, and also they had a medical laser as well. So with that company, I got a lot more breadth of knowledge, a lot more diverse experience with optics as well. And I get to learn about several different types of industries. You have defense on one end, and you have medical on the other end, and they're both very, very different aspects, but also very similar in that they're both very highly regulated, and you need to do a lot of documentation. And from there, the company started to go shifting more towards the defense side, and laser guidance systems for rockets and stuff like that. And I found that wasn't really the direction that I wanted to go with my life. So I started looking for something else, and I found an X-ray company that made X-ray systems, and I started working there and became their lead designer, and learned a lot about the medical side of things, and the FDA approvals, 510(k)s, all that good stuff. And from there, I went and I was there for about 4 years, and the company got acquired by a very large company called Hologic that makes most of the mammography systems in the US. And I got to taste, very large companies and very structured companies, and the large companies, I found just wasn't for me. I was starting to get pigeonholed into one very specific aspect of one of their devices, as opposed to the small companies that I'd worked at before that, where I got my hands in a lot of different pots. So, when the large company acquired us, I decided, that wasn't really where I wanted to go in my life. So I looked again and found SynCardia, and I worked there for a couple of years, updating their driver and working on the next gen driver that Steve mentioned briefly. And from there I went to a new company called Bridge to Life, and that's where I'm at now, where we make liver perfusion systems. So I've done a heck of a lot of different careers in my time, but I think that's really good to learn a big breadth of experience. And I've seen a lot of different things from a lot of different industries, and I think that's given me a unique viewpoint into the best way to design something, because I've seen it from many different angles from many different industries, and how the different industries handle similar situations. So that's my experience there. And while I was jumping around and learning all those different things, I went ahead and got my MBA in my free time, in classes after work, working nights and weekends on my MBA, and got that degree on my resume, and that's helped me propel my career even further, and get into a leadership position where now I'm managing an engineering team here. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
So obviously a lot of experience here online today. So before I open up the stage, I just want to remind all of you guys, these Joe and Steve are advisors for the Hackathon. And if you feel like you want to discuss some of your problems with them, you can book in a meeting with them online and prepare your meeting. They've signed NDAs, so your secrets will be kept. Yeah, don't forget. Okay, are there any questions here, like right now? Otherwise, we have lots submitted. I can start with them as well. Okay, maybe I do that. A general question, maybe I give each of you a minute or so to answer. What advice do you have for undergraduate engineering students who are aspiring for a career in the medical device industry?
I'll let Steve go first there.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I found very helpful, and this might surprise you, were some of my creative writing classes and English. It doesn't matter how smart of an engineer you are, if you cannot communicate your ideas effectively, you'll be ineffectual as an engineer. So I would say that in addition to your engineering coursework, things such as English or whatever language is your native language, and as well as biology and physiology. I think that it's very good to have the biology and physiology basic university courses in addition to the creative writing and being able to express yourself.
I love that. Joe, what's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I fully agree with Steve. Having that creative writing aspect is something that a lot of engineers are somewhat lacking, and you know, even in resumes, when I'm looking for people, looking at their resumes, and I see a great level of attention to detail and the ability to write a clear and concise resume and get their point across is that's a huge factor. I would go and give my own viewpoints as far as getting into the field of 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 medical device. I would say, you know, any experience is good experience. So if you're looking to get into, you know, a SynCardia or some other well-known company, and you apply and you don't get into that one, you know, that's not the end of the world. There's a ton of different medical device companies out there. So getting any kind of experience, even if it's not exactly what you want to be doing right now, is super helpful in the long run, because you can always, after a few years, you get some experience at another company, even if it's not directly related. Having experience in the medical device industry helps you get more jobs in the medical device industry. So I think that would be, you know, a good starting point as well. Yeah, any experience is good experience.
Yeah, maybe to just follow up on this one, there was another question that I think relates pretty well to that. Were there any challenges you encountered when entering the medical device industry, and how would you overcome them?
One of the things that shocked me, I mean, very honestly, the first time I went into, this is when I was in university and just exploring the ideas of getting into a medically related science. I had a friend who had someone who worked in an animal laboratory, and the smells in the animal facility were awful. And it took me quite a while to get used to the smells and to be able to see a surgery on an animal. And quite honestly, I had some real challenges for a while, thinking about doing surgeries on these beautiful dogs that they were experimenting on, and they were doing surgical research. And later on, I found out that those dogs, the canine model, was very good for the research they were doing in vascular surgery. But it made me feel better when I came to the mental realization that these canines had been slated for euthanasia. So at least, you know, they were from shelters and they were going to be euthanized anyway. So, I mean, there was really a mental hurdle to go through for me. That was shocking because of that. But not all medical devices are going to have a surgical or animal surgical element to it. I have a colleague who went into prosthetics, and they were working always with people and with wheelchairs and new designs to help them to achieve normal lifestyles when they were missing a limb. And he didn't have to go through some of those struggles. So that's just very personal. I'm sorry, but you asked for, that was a hurdle I had to overcome myself.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been in one animal trial, and it's weird seeing an animal being cut open or something. It's something you've got to get used to.
Yeah, but you know, it's a lot better to have your surgeon or your practitioner, whatever, to have gone in and done a procedure dozens of times and perfected it before he is doing an operation on a loved one. And so that's another thing I realized, that there is some real utility in using the animal models, and they are treated with great respect and, might I say, reverence. Every animal lab I've been into, but it is something you have to deal with in my particular industry.
Great. Joe, do you have like a quick comment on that?
Yeah.
Like any challenge you've
I
encountered
would
potentially?
say Yeah, I would say the biggest hurdle for me, at least going from a non-regulated industry into the medical device, which is the most heavily regulated industry, is just the amount of paperwork. When I was working on industrial machines, we would have a quick change order with a brief description of what we did, and that was it. That was the end of the change. But at a medical device company, nothing had prepared me up until that point to the amount of documentation that is needed. I did my senior capstone project in college. The paper that we wrote for that was maybe 100 pages. And I frequently find myself doing, test protocols and documentation of changes that we've done where I have, 30 different reports, and each one of them is several hundred pages of documentation. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes into it, to prove that what you've done is effective. And that level of documentation is something that you'll just have to experience for yourself. So it was a big culture shock for me. I know when I got into that X-ray company, my boss and mentor said, this is unlike anything you've done before. It's about 75% documentation to 25% design work. And that held true pretty much. So.
And you
Yeah,
have
that's
to
great.
develop a little bit of a thick skin, because you can have the best idea in the world and you can prove to yourself that the idea works, but someone is going to poke holes in your idea and they're going to challenge you. If it works like this, they'll ask you to make it work like this. And they will always tip it and give you alternatives. Like Joe said, it's a big, big challenge.
Yeah, I guess these are things you might not be aware of if you just see medical device industry. So I think that's a really great insight to make people aware of that are like striving to work in that industry. Question in the chat. Question to Steven. How has your electrical engineering degree helped you in your work now? Do you still work with electronics now? What exactly does an electrical engineer do in the medical field?
Great questions, and it has modified through the years. Quite honestly, I do not do any heavy-duty electrical engineering type work now. It's much more on the more of a management and overseeing and sharing of ideas as we're working on the next generation. How it works is that when I began, I was actually working with the very original drive system, which is an external pneumatic driver. And I was working on several capacities. First of all, to redesign several of the controllers and the electronics that controlled, for instance, the vacuum blowers. And then some of the monitoring PC boards, and getting the proper PC boards that would be able to interpret the pressures. And then the airflow sensors, which we were measuring the exhausted air from the ventricles and equating that to the amount of blood that entered the ventricle. And to measure that very brief puff of air, that was a big challenge. And so I worked on all of those systems from an electrical engineer's perspective, and also supervising the technicians who were building and assembling this, and developing test methods so that we could verify that what we were designing in the lab would be repeatable and over many systems. So then it went beyond that to testing the systems and doing some of the electrostatic discharge testing and the resistance to any other outside electromechanical or electro cases that would affect the measurement capability. So we did a lot of shielding and everything. So there was a lot to do from an engineering wise. And then it came to the point where I was able to describe how the systems worked to the nurses. And so I shifted roles to be able to go out and train the engineers in the hospitals and the nurses on how to operate this big 400-pound original drive system. So that's how an electrical engineer got into it. It all gets back to electronics. And as I mentioned, the measurement of the puffs of air, when I first started, the transducers that we were using were about the size of a can of soup or something. It was, you know, and now they are the size of your little pinky finger. So big advances. You've got to stay up with the measurement technologies.
Thank you, Stephen. We've got another question. I'll just direct this one to Joe now. What does a day in the life of a biomedical engineer typically look like?
Yeah, I mean that can vary wildly depending on the company that you're at and the phase of development you're at. The biomedical engineers, that I work with, we're doing, right now for the next 6 months, we're doing a lot of V&V testing on our device, making sure that it's compliant with all the standards, making sure that our risk documentation is up to spec. The FDA really likes to see risk analyses to make sure that you're looking at all the different possibilities of what could go wrong and what the impact is if something does go wrong. What's the probability that it will go wrong, and what's the possible harm? So that's a big aspect of it. We're looking at the design, and we've gone through our clinical trials on our device, and from the clinical trials, we had some lessons learned, some things that we needed to update, some sensors that gave some errors, so we're swapping them out. So speccing out those new components, looking at the impact of those changes, designing test protocols to make sure that those new components work effectively, looking at the physiological impact of making those changes. It's a big wide array of things that we're doing. But I mean, the typical life cycle would be you spend some time doing a rough prototype to figure out what the capabilities are of the system. From there, you would finalize any system requirements. You would go back to the team and say, hey, here's what is possible. And they say, okay, here's what we absolutely need. You would finalize those requirements, and you would take those into your design inputs and make sure that you're tracing your design inputs against your requirements. And then you have your requirements documentation, and you go from there and you design the actual components, the systems, the software that goes into it. And from there, along with the risk documentation, you're looking at your V&V documentation, and you go through all that. And once you can prove to the FDA that you know what you're doing, and that everything looks good on a benchtop model, then they'll let you go into clinical trials. And that's usually the point where you're working on even more documentation while the system is in clinical trials. And then once you get through with that, then you're working on any updates, any final documentation, and then get into your actual submission. So the day in the life of the engineer changes based on where the system is at in its development life cycle.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
I'll just move on to the next question straight away. If you want to get into biomedical engineering, but want to be flexible in your undergraduate engineering degree, for example, mechanical engineering, will it be possible to specialize in it later for your graduate degree?
I would say absolutely. My degree was in mechanical engineering, and I ended up in the medical field anyways. Mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering are very similar. And maybe I'm a bit biased because I'm a mechanical engineer, but I would say a mechanical engineering degree is a bit more versatile, because if you end up not wanting to go into biomedical engineering and you end up not appreciating the medical devices, or you want to change a pace and you want to go design something industrial, you want to design something not a medical device, it's harder to go as a biomedical engineer into other industries, rather than going from other industries as a mechanical engineer into biomedical engineering. So I would say, if you're not entirely sure that you want to go into biomedical engineering, I would say a mechanical engineering degree is a little bit more flexible.
Steven, do you have any comments on that?
I agree. There is room for all sorts of engineering and engineering disciplines. I went to the electrical engineering, but also I had a lot of structural engineering classes that were part of mechanical engineering studies. Those have all been very, very beneficial. Those types of engineering classes, even if it were perhaps civil engineering or something, you're going to learn about how engineering principles can be applied. And it doesn't matter what, I agree with Joe that engineering degrees are very, very strong. That give you ability to work in many different industries and be flexible. The other thing that Joe mentioned is when you're doing all of the clinical trials and there's software development, there's data collection and how you look at data. And sometimes you have to collect a lot of data and you need to have the statistical analyses for that. So there's room for mathematicians and statistical analysis, computer science, software designers, all of these things. It takes a very, very large team. One of our principal brand new engineers working with us, he's brand new, fresh out of school, and I love his ideas. He's very, very effective, and he's a mechanical engineer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think especially that's something that's so exciting about biomedical engineering, that like you really need very broad diversity to get your device to work properly. Before we move on to the next question, we did get a bunch of questions submitted before about the choice of degree and if there's space for people in the biomedical industry that did not study specifically biomedical engineering. For example, there's one question about someone who is majoring in physics and computer science. However, I think we've pretty much covered that right now, that any engineering degree is a good start for, or a good education to enter the industry. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I agree. That is very, very true. It takes a very, very large team with a lot of disciplines, even accounting. And Joe has his degree in business, and I'll tell you, that's one of the things that I had to learn a lot about, is more of the business systems and how to manage that as I moved into management roles, how to look and analyze inventory and how to manage inventory, and how many turns in your inventory to make your profit margin makes sense. And there's a lot to that. And I'm sure that Joe studied a lot of that in his MBA classes.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's any number of degrees that are useful. I'm looking for you know, a sort of software engineer in my company right now. And you know, computer science leads right into that software engineering. There's any number of options for you. I know a physicist who turned into an electrical engineer just by studying, you know, after work or whatever. They didn't have a degree in electrical engineering, but they turned into one of the best electrical engineers that I knew. Was you know, degreed physicist, and just had a passion for electrical engineering. And I think your passion and your experience, you know, as you get further into your career, you know, can change your trajectory and let you get into different aspects of engineering.
Thank you. I think we should touch base again on the MBA program. There have been a question submitted asking you about speaking a little bit more about how the MBA has impacted your career, and if you could compare an MBA to a master's or PhD in biomedical engineering.
Yeah, I would say as an engineer, there's kind of two tracks that you can go into. The first would be sort of a very technical role where you turn into the expert in one technical field. And the second would be sort of a leadership management role. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, whether an MBA or a master's or a PhD in biomedical engineering or any other kind of master's or PhD would be useful for. I was kind of inclined towards leading, mentoring, helping others grow, and you know, building up a team. So the MBA was kind of the right path for me in that aspect. But you know, I have a PhD in biomedical engineering on my team, and you know, I wouldn't trade him for an MBA in his role for all the money in the world. So it depends on what you want to do with your career. If you want to be a manager, a leader, or if you want to be very focused and be an individual contributor instead. They have their pros and cons both ways.
Right, I think there's a follow-up question here on the same topic. Would there be a significant benefit towards having both a master's and an MBA if looking towards working in a leadership position?
A master's, a technical master's as well as an MBA. Yeah, I mean, more degrees, more letters after your name never hurts on your resume, certainly. It kind of depends on the company that you're going towards. You know, different companies put more or less value into the amount of degrees you have, and more or less value into the kind of work that you're working on. So it kind of depends on where you're working at. You know, how much emphasis they put on those degrees versus your experience. So somebody with a master's degree fresh out of school versus somebody, you know, without a master's degree and 2 years experience, you know, different companies will choose one over the other. So it's kind of up in the air which company would go for which one. I would say if it's something that you're enjoying, you know, going to school, then I would say, yeah, go ahead and get all the degrees you can. It never hurts to have that extra knowledge.
Absolutely. I agree completely with that. And Joe, you used a word before that I think is applicable, and that is passion. If you don't enjoy one aspect of it, then you're not going to do that well. So use your talents and your time where your passion is. Sometimes it takes a little while to develop that passion, and getting additional degrees will help to guide you to find where you really want to sit.
Thank you. I think one of the next questions, I want to combine that with some which were submitted beforehand and some things we've touched base on before as well. So what do you think are like the most important skills companies look for when they're hiring someone? And then as follow-up, how do you think can students during their studies acquire them like in the best way? How do they, we've already mentioned internships, any sort of experience, but maybe you can be a bit more specific to give the students attending actually some concrete advice how to find opportunities and which opportunities would make them most employable.
Well, I think that we've touched on some of this before, but communication skills are very, very important. Writing skills and communication, verbal, those are very important. And then the employer is usually going to be looking for some specific jobs that they may be interested in and be thinking about future development opportunities. So when you start working for a company, keep your eyes open for additional things to do. Don't shy away from putting in the extra hours. Joe mentioned that he got burned out. I have to share that. The first company that I was working for, we were putting in 80 and 90 hours a week, and it was draining, and it took all of the enjoyment out of it. But I have to say that I looked for additional opportunities, and by finding other opportunities within the company, I was able to branch out and then made myself more marketable for future opportunities.
Yeah, and I would just say, as far as my own experience, my first job right out of college, the company was very small, 20 people. They hired a lot of people right out of college, maybe because they overworked them and they wanted people who didn't know any better. But either way, the recruiter who reached out to me to apply for this position had me specifically list hobbies and extracurricular activities that I did beyond any internships or anything. And one of the things that I did to help put myself through school was restoring motorcycles. So I would buy an old motorcycle that somebody had sitting in their barn for 20 years, and I would fix it up and get it running and clean it up and sell it and make a profit with that. And that was something that I did in my spare time that isn't necessarily something that would normally go on a resume, but that was something that company really looked for, to see that passion for, for engineering, for fixing things, for, improving things. So any way that you can help showcase that on your resume, or in the interview, by letting them know about any extracurricular activities you're doing, even if it's not entirely relevant, is something that's actually very valuable, especially in your early career.
Thank you. That's a great insight as well. I think the bottom line here is that experience doesn't have to be that formal as in terms of working in a company or doing an internship in a company, but it can also be something you volunteer for or you do in your free time where you just gain more knowledge. Is that correct? Did I get that?
Absolutely.
All right. All right, then there was a question here about the importance of a medical degree in the space. The question is, what is your opinion on Master of Science plus medical doctor or medical doctor and PhD programs in terms of their cost value, time cost value relationship?
So the question, if I understand correctly, is the cost and the benefit of getting those other degrees. Is that Is that correct? Or
Yeah, in terms
again,
of
I think it gets,
time, and like, is it worth it? Does it really help you?
yeah, if that's where your passion lies, it is worth it. Now, we have, with the artificial heart program, have had very close associations with many, many doctors. We have had several MDs and PhD and MAPA. We have had them on staff or on retainer many, many times to help us in our clinical trials and the design of our clinical trials. Many times we as engineers are a little bit out of touch with the people who are going to be in the hospitals to receive those services. So it's very good and very important to have those other medical professionals feed in or even be a part of the company. So if that's where your passion lies, you can still do biomedical engineering and engineering research and be an MD or some sort of a professional or a doctor of nursing or perfusion. Those I've worked with a lot of those through the years with the artificial heart, and they've just been advisors to us to give us a better idea of the population and the problems that they have in industry so that we can solve the problems.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, as far as a practicing medical doctorate goes, if that's where you want to go, then having a a bachelor's or a master's in biomedical before getting your MD, I think is super helpful. Absolutely. I think if you're going for MD, if you want to be a design engineer, I would say maybe an MD is not worth it. If you're looking just to be, some sort of design engineer. A PhD, again, if you want to go into that very specialized field that you're looking at getting your PhD in, I think then yes, it's absolutely worth it. If you have that passion, definitely go for it. It would be absolutely worth it. But if you're just looking to add letters to your name for your resume, I would say, go ahead and skip those, get some certificates, and just get your experience instead of spending that time. So if it's something that you're really passionate about, then it's definitely worth it. But if you're just looking to add some credentials to your resume, I would say having those 4 years or 8 years of experience is probably more valuable.
So I guess there's no good or bad. It really depends on the person and where the person's passion lies and where the person want to go.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
right. I want to talk about another thing, Joe, you think touched base on before when you were talking about your journey in your career, and it's about the work environment and the differences between established industry, a startup, or maybe even a non-for-profit. The question we received on that was, do you think there are any misconceptions about the medical device industry and the different sections I've just mentioned, and what are the differences between those?
Yeah, so I mean, a big company and a small company are going to have a lot of differences. A big company, when you're working on one device, you'll have 50 or 100 engineers working on that one device. A small company, you might have 5. So at a small company, you're going to have a lot more breadth of experience than at a large company. A large company, you'll learn to do one specific thing very well. Whereas at a small company, you'll learn to do a lot of different things, good enough. So that's the difference in my view of a large versus a small company. I've never seen a medical device company that's a not-for-profit, so I couldn't really speak to that as far as being a design engineer in that aspect. But that would be my opinions on a large company versus a small company, at least.
Steve, do you have any thoughts on the differences?
I think that another corollary to all of this is what we had mentioned previously, and that is the massive amount of paperwork that is required for the regulatory bodies. Every single country in the world has a health ministry, FDA, well, every single country has people looking out, and you have to do all of the justification, whatever you're making, whether it is limb prostheses or if it is artificial hearts or organ preservation. There is an incredible amount of paperwork, and that requires expertise in knowing the laws, the regulatory path, what regulations need to be met, and then how to show the regulatory bodies that you are complying with all of the international regulations. Fortunately, many of the regulatory bodies have become more unified. And early on in my career, we had to submit for every single country that we went to. And sometimes even in the United States, there were different regulations in the different regions that we would go to. Whereas now we have a much more unified, and if you meet the regulations for the FDA, you're largely accepted for the Canadian regulatory bodies. And it used to be that that would be sufficient for the European regulatory bodies. That's no longer so. The European regulatory bodies are now a little bit more divergent. And so you need to have a lot of people who are in quality systems to describe that what you are making always is consistent and document it properly. And then the regulatory bodies, the regulatory sections of the company to submit those needed papers to the regulatory authorities in that country. So it's a lot of paperwork, and it's way beyond the engineering coming up with the greatest new idea.
Thank you. I think that's very good insight. Is there any like misconception you had about the jobs you're doing now, or the company, or like the medical device industry itself, that you weren't really aware of before you entered it? I think, Steve, you already mentioned the animal trials, which were something like you weren't aware of, or the paperwork. Is there anything else you think like people might think about this industry, which actually isn't really true?
I think Joe touched on one of the things that I was not prepared for, and that is the length of time it takes to get your idea and your innovation actually out to the market. And it's very expensive to get a new idea or take an existing product and make a change. And it's surprising to me the length of time it takes. That's a surprise to me, how long it takes.
Yeah, I agree. I think people hear about oh, Bivacor, just did their first human trial, and they're going to be on the market real soon. Well, real soon is going to be many years away before they're clinically available. And they've been working on that for many years.
Yeah.
I think a couple of decades even. So it's a very long process to design a complex medical device. Yeah.
Thank you. Dario, I see your question, but that's again a bit off topic, and I think we would want to focus on the career advice here for now. So I'll just leave this with the battery systems and move on to another question we had submitted before, which was about the importance of networking and mentors. Maybe you can share some personal experience. Did you have any mentors in your career? What do you think? How to find some? Is that valuable? Just the whole landscape around that.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I had some great mentors throughout my career that really helped push me to be a better engineer. And with that and the networking that I gained from them, I came to work at SynCardia because one of my old coworkers was over there, and he said, "Hey, I need some help. Can you come work over here and help me out?" And I said, "Yeah." And then my old boss approached me from a previous company and said, "Hey, I need some help, working on this perfusion system. Can you come help me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll help you out." And so I think networking is definitely a great way to have a career advancement, and also to just get advice and get mentorship. It's probably one of the most valuable things you could do for career advancement is have a good network of people.
I agree 100%. And Joe, I miss working with you on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, and in fact, I think that all the time in our careers, we should be looking for mentors or examples of how we want to be or how we do not want to be, and then govern your life and develop those habits that will push you more toward your ideal and what you see works well in the company to be effective.
Yeah, fully agree. A bad example, a bad role model is as influential as a good role model is. And I miss working with you, and I miss having your mentorship, to this day, Steve.
How did you find your mentors? Was it just kind of organically because you worked with people, or which advice would you give to the students attending now if they're like, "Oh, I know where I want to go, but I think some advice would maybe help me getting there better"?
Yeah, I think most of my connections were made fairly organically. If you can work at multiple different companies and get that experience, then you naturally build a larger network that way. Going to any conferences or trade shows not only helps you keep up to date on the latest technology, but also helps you network as well. So I think that would be a great thing if the company that you work at ever offers to send you out to a conference, then I would say jump on that and take full advantage.
I agree completely. Yeah, it has been as you put it, organically in the environment that I've worked with, both for administrative as well as engineering.
All right, thank you. So we're a little bit over the hour now. If there's any further question, I would like allow another one if someone wants to. Otherwise, I'll close it here. If it doesn't look like it, then thank you, Joe and Steven, so much for your time.